Good morning, Prof.
Hello, good morning, sir. How
Good
are
to
you
have you
today?
join
Thank you.
us on the live stream again this morning.
Happy to do so. Thank you.
All right. Good morning to all of our viewers and our listeners from all around the world. Everyone who is making our time to join the live stream this morning. Thank you very much for taking the time to be a part of our live stream. I'd always encourage that you not only watch, but you drop your comments, your reactions. If you have a question to ask, feel free to ask that question, drop it in the comment section, and we'll be having Prof's reaction and response to your question. Today with Prof on our live stream, we want to engage a very interesting subject. I want to look at global trends and implications for Africa. Global trends and implications for Africa moving towards industrialization. So this morning we'll be discussing events around the world, global trends, and the implications they hold for Africa's growth and development, especially as we move towards industrialization. It must be said that conversations around the need for Africa to move from being basically a consumption economy to a production economy is gaining a lot of momentum in the days we are living in. So much momentum. There's so much case for moving Africa from just being consumption based to production based to industrialization. It is against this backdrop that I want to have this conversation with Prof. They're looking at events around the world and what specific and strategic implications these happenings around the world, especially within the socio-economic and political sense, have for implications they have for Africa's growth and development and the industrialization of Africa. It promises to be a very engaging and insightful conversation. So please join the conversation. Let me hear what you think in our comment section, and share the link, get your friends involved. Let's talk. Let's talk. We are in this our lifetime, in our generation. Nigeria must become better. Africa must become better. And it starts with us having this conversation and then doing more than just a conversation, acting on the things we are talking about. Every one of us has a part to play. It begins with becoming aware. We have a duty to put the information out there, listen, share. Let's start that awakening. People become socially aware and conscientized about our responsibility as Nigerians, as Africans, to move our nation and our continent forward. Prof, thank you for your time and good to be able to talk to you again.
Thank you.
And
Thank
so,
you.
like, my intro there, today I want to engage on the subject of things happening around the world, implications they hold for Africa, especially as we move towards industrialization. But to get us started, I want to begin with these discussions around austerity. The concept of austerity, and that word is a word that's been bandied around for decades in Africa. We have a lot of policies to push austerity measures. So I want to begin by asking, what is austerity? What's austerity about?
Okay, so austerity basically means to lack. It's economics. I think the definition of it is the allocation of limited or rare resources, and so austerity is that definition on steroids, meaning that the resources are very rare,
Mm.
and so we need to cut back. Austerity means to cut back, to cut down, to deindustrialize, to reduce wages, reduce employment. It also means to increase taxes, so and increase energy cost. We have austerity in all nations today, and so it means that citizens will be paying higher taxes to pay off government debt. So austerity comes about because of government debt, and so the need is to stop spending and pay more in taxes so the government can pay off the debt, or at least pay the interest on the debt. America just moved into the situation where the annual interest bill it pays is higher than any other cost. It's more
Wow.
than defense, any other budgetary cost. The number one is interest payments, which is ridiculous. That is unsustainable. It's impoverishing to the economy, and that enables the economists, the bankers, to drive a. It's the bankers that really drive our economic policy. They're the ones who decide. It's not the governments,
Mm.
and governments are just servants really to the bankers, and so. And the bankers decide on this policy of austerity so that taxes are increased. So, as I said, so people, the government will use those taxes to pay off interest payments. Also, things like public benefits, like pensions, education, medical, and any sort of public benefits will be reduced. So the government is paying out less in benefits. That's austerity. And so, again, the main government expenditure is meant to be interest, not pensions, not helping people, not helping the poor in the community. So, or those in need, but moving their budget more towards interest payments, which goes to the banks. And so, people say they don't like socialism, but really, we have a socialist economy here where the banks are the poor people that we help out.
Mm.
Uh, all our money goes to the banks, and the poor bankers, they're very poor. They need support, and so they're asking for more money every year, and the government gives them more money every year. And so we have a support system here,
Mm.
um, which is supporting the banks, and the poor people support the banks with their taxes, cutbacks in their pensions, and other sorts of government spending. So the government is not allowed to spend on infrastructure anymore, on economic development, because they have to be spending on their debt and on their interest rates. So it's a policy of economic poverty for the country,
Mm.
regression in development, in deindustrialization. So it comes about from many reasons, not just because of the debt, but the bankers have many excuses in their arsenal for austerity. Another one is the fraud of climate change, and they say that because of climate change, we're all going to be destroyed in 2 weeks, and so we have to stop industries, we have to stop pollution, we have to put up the price of energy. And that's one of the reasons why they well, it's not real reason, but it's an excuse. It's their cover story for why energy prices have gone up so high.
Mm.
Um, in my experience, in Nigeria, they've gone up about 800% in the last few years. So most people can't afford that. Diesel as well, to run generators, for keep businesses alive. It's small businesses, medium-sized businesses are closing down everywhere. But this is not just in Nigeria, not just in Africa. It's happening in my home country of Australia as well. I think last year was the record year in Australia for the closing down of small and medium-sized businesses. And that's because of taxes. It's because of regulations. Um, Before you do anything, there's 1,000 government regulations that you have to get through.
Mm.
Like, is your business affecting a certain beetle or insect in your area? And there have to be all these bureaucratic investigations into the effect on the environment. And they just make up excuses, regulations to stop people opening businesses, to tax them more, and basically to close down. They're against the middle class. And the reason they're against the middle class is because the middle class is democratizes our societies too much. Once you put financial power into the hands of the population, they have a voice.
Yeah.
They have money. They can travel. They can hold seminars. They can hold conferences. They can speak on the media. They become active, and they end up with political power because they have a voice in society. So that is a
Mm.
challenge to the political power of the banks that they're exercising through governments. So banks are out to shut down the voice of other people. Banks are monopolists, and monopolist means that they hold all the industrial power, the economic power, the media power, the voice power,
Yeah.
and you know, in society. So monopolists will always be about shutting down the middle class and holding all the funds in just in a few hands of our economy. So all our economies are moving towards that situation. Austerity moves the economy away from the basic population, the middle
Mm.
class, and into the hands of a few people. And that's happening all around the world, and it's based on lies, lies of debt, lies of climate change. Debt is a lie, and it's fostered by economists around the world. And these economists are sponsored by the same bankers.
Mm.
I know of one economist who is very useful. He's called Richard Werner. Richard Werner, Werner, and he started lecturing on true economics, not of austerity but of abundance,
Mm.
and not of debt but of financial abundance and and productive abundance, industrial abundance. A very good economist. And the CIA approached him and threatened him for revealing the truth about economics and the lie, the fraud of debt, of national debt, and how it's like Nigeria has become a debt slave today. Most countries have, and that whole thing is a fraud perpetuated on our countries by the banks. And that's where the real problem is. It's with the banks, and so they build these frauds upon nations to put us into debt. They take us to war with other nations to bring about regime changes, particularly if any nation is not cooperating with the global banks. That nation will find themselves in sanctions or in war, regime change, revolutions, assassinations, things like that. So the banks are visiting all sorts of evils. When I say the banks, I mean the globalization of banking, visiting all sorts of evils upon our nations. One of the main sources of our misery. And so Richard Werner, this economist, he exposes this. He's qualified. He's from Oxford University, but he hasn't succumbed to the fear or favor of lying about our economies. And so it's good for people to look him up, and he exposes the lie of debt, of national debt, and not only him, but there's many others that do this that I've learnt from as well. And the problem is that governments have been bought into this lie that they need to borrow from banks. Nigerian government does that as well. So they borrow from the IMF, and so what they do, they borrow $10 billion from the IMF. The IMF creates that money out of nothing and deposits it in a foreign bank on the behalf of Nigeria. It does not transfer that money to Nigeria, and then says to Nigeria, because you have $10 billion deposited in a foreign account in another country on your behalf, you can now go ahead and print naira to that value in Nigeria and then share that through the banks in Nigeria. But that's a lie, because you don't need that
Wow.
money, those
Wow.
dollars deposited for you in a foreign bank. The Nigerian government doesn't need foreign banks to loan money. That they can print the money themselves in Nigeria. Just go ahead and print the naira. You don't need an IMF loan
Yeah.
for this.
Yeah.
Yeah, the banks, the government has sovereign authority, and this is what we're talking about: is regaining our sovereignty from the banks. We don't need to learn from these banks. So the banks create money out of nothing, loan it to the government, and then charge the government interest on those loans. And it's not even banks' money; they made it out of nothing just by
Mm.
pushing a button on their computer. That money doesn't come from anywhere; it's just created out of nothing. And these
Wow.
are one of the things that the banks are trying to hide. They tell us that our loans are made from deposits, savings from people, or reserves that they have. That's why the American bank's called the Federal Reserve, but they don't have any reserves. They print money just from pushing a button on a computer out of nothing. So money is not made by deposits of savings. Money is made by digital. by just digitally creating that money
mm,
out of nothing, and then loaning that money. So it doesn't even belong to the banks. It really, money that's created out of nothing belongs to the people, not to the banks. And then the banks charge interest on that money. They're making interest on money that's not theirs, that they just created from nothing. So the whole thing's a fraud. So instead of the banks creating money out of nothing and then loaning it to the government, and then the government increasing taxes on the people to pay that interest, this is what's keeping people in austerity, and it's a fraud. What the government should be doing is what we say is taking back our national sovereignty. This is it. You see, we are under this globalism. It's an imperial system set up after the Second World War with the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, and the Bank of
mm,
International Settlements. And it's a scam. And they say that the IMF, the International Monetary Fund, is set up to help develop other countries, and we're called developing countries. But that's a scam. They're not. The International Monetary Fund is set up to keep us from developing so that our resources might be owned and utilized by others. And this is clearly the policy of Henry Kissinger, who's responsible for wars all over the world. He's responsible for impoverishing countries. He's one of the worst, you know, diplomats in the last century, in terms of causing this austerity and terrible poverty to billions of people, and wars, constant wars for economic reasons to control this imperial control of the world. Um, and so, like in 1974, the Kissinger report said that Nigeria, it was a secret report in that time, it's easy to find on the internet, 1974 Kissinger report. He specified in that report, which was then secret, as I said, but now it's been released to the public, that Nigeria must not be able to use its own resources. That those resources must be used by the richer nations. So he said that Nigeria must not be allowed to industrialize. That was deliberate policy of the Secretary of State of America in President Nixon's time. The American government was kidnapped by the British Empire after the Second World War, and used for its imperial purposes around the world. The banks, setting up the banks, as I said, the IMF and so on. The CIA was used to
mm,
protect this global banking system, and the American military as well. Um, no American president since the Second World War, since Roosevelt, has had independence. They've all been ruled by this globalist system. And the American president that wouldn't hold to that was de-seated. Just like presidents of other countries, America's under the same domination. Um,
wow.
and President Trump today is rebelling against this system. President Kennedy did as well. He was killed. Um, and so President Trump has a vision for reversing this deindustrialization, for taking sovereignty back over American money, so it's not controlled by the banks, for getting rid of America's debt and the control of global banking over America, and claiming sovereignty back over its currency. So what we should be doing, what the IMF has been doing, has been loaning money, so to speak, taking the interest from the Nigerian people, um, and dictating how that money loaned is to be used. So they say that that money cannot be used for industrialization in Nigeria because of lack of resources. And so, following Henry Kissinger's diktat that Nigeria must not be able to industrialize. So the IMF has followed that. We've had the structural adjustment program in Nigeria in the 80s, deindustrializing Nigeria. And it's just gone from bad to worse ever since then. Now I've got, as I said, climate change, deindustrializing Nigeria. The whole thing's a fraud. And the IMF said, okay, if they give a loan to us to further indebt us so they can get more interest from us, that loan must not be used for industry. It can only be used for aid, like medical aid, injections, things like that. The so-called philanthropists, helping Nigeria with. Well, they're not helping Nigeria. We have to make loans for all of these philanthropic interventions. I think now Bill Gates is inventing new mosquitoes with altered DNA to release them into Africa, so we won't get malaria. So new DNA invented mosquitoes. I mean, what could possibly go wrong with that? Engineered mosquitoes, lovely. And then, doing an experiment on African people, just like they've done with other medical interventions in the past. And that's not free. We pay for that sort of thing. How do we do it? With IMF loans to our country. And all that goes back to Bill Gates, and we pay the interest, not just him, but I'm just using him as an example. And we pay the interest rates on it as the Nigerian people. We are the ones that go into further austerity, not the philanthropists. Their wealth is escalating very, very fast. We don't want philanthropy. We want industrialization.
Mm.
We don't want aid like that. We don't want NGOs. We want industrialization. We don't want the IMF loans for aid. And we don't even want their loans. We want our sovereignty back so the government can print its own money. And if the government prints its own money and then targets that money towards industrialization, that will not produce inflation in our country. That it's only when you print money and you give it out for just to consumer spending, for people to be buying
Yeah.
things without making things, just to be spending on themselves, just for consumerism, that will produce inflation. Because if you put more money into the market and not more production, then you've got a lot of money chasing a few goods, a few products, and so the price of those products will go up because people have more money to buy them with and
Yeah.
to compete with each other to buy those few products. Or if you print money and just give it to the stock exchange people who have investments in land or in stocks on the stock market, they will just spend money on their financial assets, on their bigger bonds, storing wealth for themselves.
Mm.
And the value of financial assets will increase, the value of properties will increase, and there'll be inflation that will be passed on to the poorer people. They won't be able to buy houses because the price of housing goes up too much. So you don't print money or loan money for those financial assets or property spending. When the government prints money, it must be targeted towards production,
Yeah.
the, the increasing the productivity of the country and the number of goods that the country is making, the development of its resources, mining and petroleum and refined oil and energy and bringing down the nuclear installations, these sorts of things, anything that will improve the country's infrastructure so that the country can bring down the price of energy and then develop its industry, that will pay for government can print as much money as it wants to do that with. And when we have industries and cheap energy, that that will pay off all of the debt of the we can pay off all of our debt once we have industry. Once we are making things and selling things, and we
Yeah.
have things to trade with other countries, we are going to make a lot of money and we become wealthy. So economics defined as limited resources and the distribution of limited resources as austerity is a lie.
Mm.
Debt is a lie. We can pay off debt by stopping to borrow from these global bankers, printing our own money, and circumnavigating the austerity policies of IMF, saying that we can't use that money for industry, and say, okay, we won't take your money then. We don't need you as a colonial master. We'll print our own money and we'll use that for industry and we will make wealth, and we will deny the definition of economics, that
Mm.
it's austerity, that it's the distribution of limited resources, like Henry Kissinger would say. And we'll say, no, we are people, we are mankind made in the image of God. We can invent, we can subdue the earth, we can have dominion over our environment, and we can produce wealth and abundance and prosperity so that we don't have to relegate the poor to austerity. It's immoral.
Mm.
Relegating sending billions of people to poverty in the name of austerity so we can enrich a few people, the people at the
Yeah.
top. That's totally immoral. It's totally against the biblical doctrines of Jubilee and anything that Jesus taught.
Yeah.
It's completely an immoral view of economics, and it has nothing to do with Christianity. So Christianity, in saying, "Oh yes, we need to believe in climate change," we don't want to, you know, go against, these global teachings, and we believe in deindustrialization to save the climate. We are sacrificing billions of people on the altar of
Yeah.
austerity.
Yeah.
Christians should not do that. It's a lie and it's wrong. And the best way to save the environment is for the country to become prosperous. Then we can spend money on environmental restoration. We can restore deserts, not restore deserts, restore forests from deserts. Once we can pump up water from artesian, limitless, we have limitless water under the Sahara Desert. It's without limit, and it's not. Water is not in austerity good. It's not a limited resource, and it's
Yeah.
replenished all the time. We can green the Sahara Desert. All we need is cheap energy. And any government that doesn't bring down the price of energy and says that he's working on a long-term solution to economic poverty is lying.
Mm. I
You
hear you.
cannot have prosperity with high energy costs. You cannot help the poor with high energy costs. The price of energy must plummet and become cheap and abundant. That's the first thing that must be done to a country. And all over Africa, that must be done, especially Africa, because we have energy everywhere, gas, oil, everything.
Yeah.
We have one of the most abundant resource centers of the world. So austerity is a total fraud and global corruption on this continent. And our governments in this continent need to take back control of our economies, of our politics, of our economic policy, of our banking policies, of our money creation policies. Don't let colonials create our money for us. We need to create our own money and take back control of our resource development, even our trade. Don't trade through the World Trade Organization. We need to make our own trade agreements, just like Trump's doing in America. We need to do the same thing. We need to. What Trump is doing is good. He talk about tariffs and those sorts of things and scaring people. But what he's doing is taking American control over American trade, taking back trade policy from the globalists and saying, no, we are a sovereign country. We will make individual agreements with individual nations ourselves. We will not let the World Trade Organization tell us who we can sell to, what price we can sell it to, how much we can sell to. We will, Nigeria will make its own bilateral agreements with individual nations, and we will trade with that nation based entirely on our own decisions um, and our own benefits. We don't want the World Trade Organization, being a colonial master. These things are a disgrace. Nigerian government, on the behalf of Nigerian people, must make its own trade decisions with Ghana, with all the countries around us, with any country around the world. We do our own trade agreements one with each country on what is good for Nigeria. So we need to follow what Trump's doing, and in these aspects, what he's doing is taking back America from globalist control, and it's high time, and we need to do the same thing.
Thank you, sir. I kind of very much agree with you there that when a country invests more in its industrial sector and becomes a nation that is actively producing, it increases the prosperity base of the country and reduces its debt margin. But when we are solely, reliant on imports and for everything we consume, the debt profile continues to grow and then poverty continues to pervade. I think on our last stream, you made reference to the fact that in the 80s, when you came to Nigeria, there were a lot of thriving local industries, you know, We had the Ariwa textiles, the textile industry in the north. You had the coal mining industries in the east, in the eastern part of the country. You had the Ajaokuta steel rolling mills, in the north central, and you had refineries. All these were up and functioning. And I think that they largely had a hand in the stability and prosperity of the Nigerian economy as at that period. But one of
Yes.
the things very evident was as these companies began to die, these industries declined and went defunct, economic woes began, and we had a lot of problems. And so, to what extent do you feel like I want to ask you a very a question here? What, in your own estimation, could account for some of the factors that led to the decline of our domestic industries, and what are the challenges to having them revive today? Every government comes and we talk about getting our industries back up, getting our industries back up. But it's always more talk, more talk, more talk, and as if something just keeps making it very difficult. In your own view, what do you think is happening? Why are we where we are, sir?
Well, it's the deliberate policy of these globalist bankers, as I've been saying, and they came out with a system of globalist economics. And I was taught this back in the 70s at university, and I believed it was true. And they said that each country should focus on what their particular strength is, and then allocate other sectors of their economy to other nations.
Mm,
So if a country's strength is agriculture, then they should deindustrialize and let other countries with cheaper wages do the industrial work. And so a lot of Australia's industries were shut down and shipped out to China, where back in the 70s and 80s and 90s, Chinese wages were low. They've risen now. China has wised up to what's happening. They've taken control over their economy in recent years from the globalists. But so the people that own the industries in China were these globalist bankers, and globalists, what we call them oligarchs, the main business leaders of the world.
mm,
They, they're European-based people, American-based people, Westerners, and they shifted their financial operations to China, but they owned these industries in China, and they also worked with Chinese oligarchs. And these are sort of Chinese businessmen that didn't operate for the interests of the Chinese people, but operate instead in the interests of global oligarchs and their own personal wealth. And we've had that with, in Nigeria as well. You get certain, people tied in with global interest, and they might sponsor that they might benefit personally very well from it, but the policies are against the bulk of the population of their country. And my brother was involved in this. In one of my brothers in Australia, we had a strong textile industry in Australia, and he borrowed money from the banks and bought out these textile ministries in Australia, and closed them down,
wow.
and then sent out the business to China. And he made a lot of money, millions of dollars. But we no longer had textile industry in Australia.
Mm,
And we started importing a lot of rubbish from China, like shirts and things like that, made, sheets made abroad. It was very cheap and poor quality. And we had no industry in Australia anymore. So that's basically what globalist economics was teaching. Ship out your industry to countries that have a strategic advantage in terms of labor or some other issue,
yeah.
and then you concentrate on where your country is strong. So they said, okay, Nigeria is strong in resources, so we should allow foreign countries to ship out our resources to their industrial bases, and we shouldn't use the resources here in Nigeria for industry. And so that we went along with that. We said, oh, the IMF must be right, and and certain people were bought out financially in our country to agree with this policy, and so We stopped industrial sectors in this country and just made our resources available to industries in other nations.
Mm.
Uh, and so the price and the value of our resources was determined by global factors, not by Nigeria. We lost control of our trade, of our pricing, of our currency. All of these, our resources were priced in dollars and not in naira, so the value of the naira collapsed. The value of the naira collapsed since the 1980s because we're not producing anything. The value of a currency is tied to what the country produces. The goods behind that currency
Yeah.
is the value of that currency. The industrial sector, the energy sector is the value of the currency. So when we stopped producing anything in Nigeria in the 1980s, late 70s, 80s, that's when our currency began to plummet. I think one naira used to buy $3 back in the 70s.
Mm.
And the whole reason for that is our industrial capacity. So we're being lied to. And so this is treason. Selling out our industrial sector is actually treason. What happens? Okay, so in Australia, China's making our clothing now, our textile industry. What happens if we go to war with China? We don't have any more clothes. We're all naked. I mean, this is not rocket science. So we're not allowed to tell Chinese jokes anymore, in case we offend the Chinese. I used to tell Chinese jokes when I was a boy. It was good fun. But now you can't offend anybody. With woke culture, you're not allowed to offend people. And especially important since they make your underpants. You don't want to offend the person that's making your underwear.
You don't want
And
to start wearing leaves like Adam and Eve in the
yeah,
Garden
we
of
go
Eden.
back to the lead. So this is just our politicians. They can't be this stupid
Mm.
to allow this to happen. But this is actually treason. They've been bought out. These people finance their election campaigns. Politicians should be like football players. They should wear on their shirts who is sponsoring them. So we'll know. But they hide it. They don't tell you who's paying for their election campaigns, who's sponsoring them, whether it's Pepsi Cola or Coca Cola, or they should. All these badges should be on their suits, and because they've been brought out by globalist industries, globalist policies. All of them have, all over the world, and their politicians are just servants of the globalists. They're not they're not the elite themselves. They just serve and do what they're told. Now, for Australia, closed its last oil refinery last year, so we can't refine oil. So what happens if we go to war? Where are we going to get our oil from? Where are we going to get our iron ore from? Where are we going to get our cars from? Our products, any of our products? This is just crazy, and I say it's treason because politicians that allow this to happen and promote the industrialization of the country.
Yeah.
Not only are they demoting their currency, but they are risking their nation of actual occupation and takeover in the future. In case of war or anything like that, the politicians are actually acting against the interest of their own citizens. So that's why I say we don't have a democracy, because the citizens elect these governments, but they don't act in the interest of those citizens. They're acting in other people's interests that give them money. It's all about the money, and so they're not acting. We have governments all over the world today that do not act in the interest of their people, but they act in the interest of globalists. And so if we want to rebuild the value of the naira, we've got to rebuild our industry, our cheap energy. We've got to bring down the price of our gas and of our oil
Yeah.
and nuclear energy and all these, every sort of cheap, not wind energy and solar energy. Like we had solar energy here and it works a few months of the year. When we have harmattan, the sun is covered. When we have wet season, the sun is covered. and then we have to burn firewood. I mean, you can't get proper energy that way.
Yeah, yeah.
And same with wind.
Mm.
You can charge your phone on a windy day, and when there's no wind, you can't talk to your mother because your phone's dead. This is not real energy. That this is a scam that's been foisted on us by the globalists to keep us poor. So you can't run industry on wind or solar. You've got to run it on real power like diesel or like proper electrical grids that have hydroelectricity
Yeah.
or coal power or diesel power. And that's why our electricity grids are failing because of
Mm.
climate change teachings and so on, making energy costs too high. And all these policies are against the interests of the people, and they've got to change. It's not fuel that pollutes our environment. It's cutting down trees for firewood. It's not having the resources to green our deserts.
Yeah.
That's what's destroying our environment. It's poverty that's destroying our environment, not oil.
Mm.
So they've lied to us about our environment, about everything. As I said before, you go on National Geographic, Discovery channels on satellite television, and they're constantly lying to you about the environment. And saying it's because of industry, saying it's because of oil. It's not at all. It's because of poverty.
Mm.
It's a big lie. Climate change is because of industrialization, and so no, it's not. It's because of Nigeria, when it was prosperous, when it had industry, it was involved in the Great Green Wall project in northern Nigeria, working with other West African countries, greening the lower Sahara, the Sahel region.
Yeah.
We had projects here that planting trees and greening, and it was working. They were pushing back the Sahara Desert. Why? Because Nigeria and our neighbors had the money to invest
Mm.
in environmental projects. Once we became industrial poor, all those projects stopped, and now the Sahara Desert is encroaching again. So these globalists and environmentalists are lying to us. Their whole purpose is to destroy our middle class and to impoverish our people and take away our resources and dominate them for themselves. And this has to change.
Yeah. Something I want to, you know, just came to mind while you were talking is for Nigeria to thrive as a sovereign nation to a very large extent, we must be in control of our borders. And I'm not just talking about borders from a physical perspective alone, economically also. Now, the argument today is that the world has become a global village, one global community, and as such, there is often, in economic sense, a pressure for nations to just kind of bring down their borders or open up their borders so that there is free flow of commerce and interaction across internationally. Now, I realize that nations, developing nations like Africa and other developing nations tend to suffer as a result of this because, like in Nigeria, our nations eventually become like a dumping ground for for foreign markets, import goods. A lot of them are dumped in this place, and it impacts on the capacity of our local industries to thrive and to be sustainable. You look in agricultural sectors, agriculture suffers also because we suddenly, in recent times, we consume a lot of imported goods, goods that come from abroad. And so our own local industries are not patronized. Agricultural sector is suffering. The things you cultivate, people prefer to bring them from outside and sell. And probably it affects what's happening here. So is there a relationship between, you know, being able to properly safeguard our borders? And like I said, not just our physical borders, from an economic sense, regulating trade to have a domestic advantage also or to put us in a position where we are not only producing but we are exporting? Or should we just continue to allow these, open trade policies that has made our nations more like dumping grounds? We receive a lot of inputs, and the only things we're exporting, the only things taken out of this country are our raw materials and our resources in their raw sense, but not really finished products at all. What would you say about this?
Yeah, President Trump in America is finally moving America back into a proper um, national policy, and one of them is the physical borders. So he's closed the Mexican border, and not because he's against Mexican people at all. There are a lot of very good Mexican people, lovely people. There's many of them in America already legally, but it's illegal immigrants, and these are many of them are criminals, terrorists, and revolutionaries, as we're seeing in America now. There's a strong revolutionary rebellion against government going on in many places around America. It's quite a dangerous situation. So America's in real problems. It's in real strife. It's in real risk of a communist kind of revolution. It's happening, has been for years, but gaining more momentum.
Mm.
But it's not just the physical borders, as you said. Part of globalist economics that I said was learning back in university in the 1970s is that the claim that our economies are inefficient. Say, for example, the Nigerian economy is inefficient. This is the whole basis of the structural adjustment program in the 80s
Mm.
here. And so they say that for our economies to be efficient, it must compete with global capital on a level playing field. So we've got to stop the restrictions, the borders, the financial borders, the protections that we put in our economy from global infiltration into our
Yeah.
nation. We've got to stop all that, and we've got to open up our economy financially, pull down economic restraints from finances, capital flows coming into our nation from foreign banks or foreign oligarchs. Allow that capital to flow freely into our country. And then our economy will function more efficiently based on global competition and, fair play. And, that they call it fair play in terms of what they call the free market. And this is, I've just fed up with all of these arguments about communism or capitalism or free market enterprise, and some people are libertarians. They don't believe in any government interventions.
Mm.
Trump has put tariffs on that means financial borders. It means government regulation on what
Yeah.
money can come into his country, what goods, what other countries can or cannot do in their country. Soon those tariffs will be on foreign banking. There will be comprehensive controls over the American economy to save the interests of the domestic populations.
Mm.
These sorts of things are very necessary. So you can't have a libertarian government. This idea of a free market. You just allow money to do whatever it wants, flow into any country it wants to, do whatever it wants in that country, flow out of that country. So you get, Nigeria and most countries cannot compete with global capital markets if we just have free markets. They will bring in billions of dollars into this country.
Yeah.
Just like we heard about Lazarus and the tax collectors in Judea back in the days of Roman Empire. They had huge capital reserves,
Mm.
and they could compete unfairly with farmers and with
Yeah. Yeah.
local families
Mm.
and buy out their farms and their harvest, their grain harvest, and so on, and bring down the prices and put these families out of business. That's what free market economics does. You get an unfair playing field where those with the most capital can manipulate market prices
Yeah.
and smaller players out of business. That's what's happened in Nigeria. Huge capital flows come into this country, put local businesses, and are unable to compete. And so local industries have closed down, and then they've stripped the asset from these local industries, taken them out to China and other places, and left us with nothing. That's been the consequence of the structural adjustment program. It has left us unable to compete
Yeah.
with global financial movements. And so before global economics, we had protections on our country. Money could not come into our country like that. Banks could not rule over our currencies like they do today. Foreign competitions in business couldn't just bring their money in freely like that and just buy out our businesses and so on. It couldn't happen. So we do need government controls and regulations. I remember back in the 80s when Reagan and 90s when Reagan was in power, President Reagan and Margaret Thatcher, they devastated, you know, industries in their countries. They, in the name of right-wing, non-government intervention, free trade, liberal markets, and so on. Um, this was called the rules-based order. This is how the British Empire ran back in the days of the British East India Company and the American Revolution. They called it free trade. You've got to allow the wealth of the British Empire to move freely throughout the world, India, all of its colonies, devastating those local populations. It's a lie, and they call it free trade, but all it does is just it gives them control over the global economy. And Thatcher and Reagan did that. We had certain regulations in place before Thatcher and Reagan to protect industries, to protect nations. And Reagan began to say things like, government is evil. We need, government has to get out of the way. And so, get out of whose way? Get out of the way of the oligarchs and the banks. It was a lie, and people bought into it. Coal mines were closed down, deindustrialization of the UK on a huge level.
Oh.
So that the banks could take control. It's impoverished UK peeps. If you want to be prosperous in the UK now, you have to be in London as working with one of the banks or associated businesses like that. Every other part of the country has been impoverished. One of my sons worked as a doctor in Wales, where they used to have coal mines, and now they are just ghettos of poverty, all of those areas. But Thatcher closed down all those coal mines in the name of globalist efficiency, and now the people there have nothing. They cannot reindustrialize because the government won't allow them to do it. They cannot change to some other industry or some other area of expertise because the austerity in their country forbids it. And like Australia too, we have a lot of land there, and so we're very good at farming because we have
Yeah.
so much land. And so they say, oh, we need to save the world with our grain, wheat and harvest, and so rice harvest. And so we produce an abundance of grain that we don't need in Australia, and then we dump it onto the African market, very cheaply because we can produce it at such high
Yeah.
levels that it
Yeah.
becomes. And we put farmers out of business in Africa, and then we say we're saving the world from hunger in Australia. We're doing all this good by producing so much grain, but and the farmers in Australia are making fistloads of money doing this. But what we're producing in doing this is we're producing monoculture in farming. We're breaking down our ecosystems in Australia.
Yeah.
We're destroying our rural communities because we don't have proper variety in farming anymore. And we've just cleared out our industries in the rural areas, and we just have grain farming basically, and we've closed just about everything else down. Not entirely, but on a large scale, and so it's hurting Australia as well. Farmers in Australia, most of them are really suffering. It's just some of the big capital-intensive farmers that are doing well. So we need protections on our countries financially, borders, agriculturally, so that we're not putting local people out of business. What happens if we're importing grain and harvest and rice and wheat from around the world? what happens if we, have a war, or that country can no longer give to us in some way because that country has a problem, a drought or something? Where are we going to get our food from? So a country must be self-sufficient in industry, in resources as far as possible, in whatever resources it has. It's got to develop them. If we don't have certain resources, we trade with other countries. But we
Yeah.
have to be self-sufficient in agriculture. These sorts of things will increase the value of our currency. Now, it's not enough for a government to come in to Nigeria and say, okay, we're going to encourage our farmers and we're going to stop grain coming in. And so overnight, they wake up one morning and they say, no more grain, wheat or rice can come into this country. Well, what are we going to eat? And so there's going to be hardship. What we have to, no more cars or this product or that product from abroad. And we close down our borders from imports. Well, what are we going to into? So what the government has to do is first take control of our banks and our currency. Stop learning from the IMF, print our own money, direct that towards industry and agriculture, build up our industrial, our energy, our resource, our mining sectors, build up our industrial sector, and as we're doing that, manage our borders and put tariffs on and close down foreign goods from coming in. Make intelligent bilateral trading agreements
Yeah.
with other nations that are good for both of us, our nation and for the other nation. Take control of our trade to make sure that it's, as I said, good for our nation and good for the other nation, but is building up the well-being and prosperity of our industrial sector, of our labor force, of our wage earners, our house owners, our middle class, and our farmers. It's very easy to do this. You start with our banking and how the government now directs how the government issues its own money, its own credit, and how it directs that credit, that money creation. We have to create money. It's not just Bitcoin, and so we have to create currency in order to loan it out to develop industry. Industrial growth must start with credit, money creation, and that can't be done by foreign banks. It has to be done by our government.
Yeah.
And then we inject that into proper projects in agriculture and industry and resource development, and then we can take control over our trade and our tariffs and our financial borders and these sorts of things. And it's very simple to do. Look, we've got to love our country again. As I said the other day, we're putting up a very tall flag. I think the tallest flag in our state on our side. You can see it from a long distance. It's going to have a very big Nigerian flag on it. It's
Yeah.
time to lead this country. Take down the
Wonderful.
globalist flag, the UN
I
flag.
hear you, sir.
We talk about, well, what's the international law? What's people talk about? Forget international law. What's our law? We have a sovereign legal. We are a sovereign legal state. What's Nigerian law? That's good for Nigerian people. And all this global citizen nonsense. We are Nigerian citizens. Do we love other people? Yes. Do we love other
Yeah.
nations? Yes. Do we cooperate
Yeah.
with other nations? Yes. But we cooperate them first as Nigerians, taking control of our own sovereignty, our own country, and building the welfare of our own people. And we need Nigerian flags so that, and I say the same as Australian. We need Australian flags. Every country, we need proper national identity, not to go to war and hate other countries, but to be proud of our country.
Yeah.
Nigerians will put in a good day's work. If we're, one reason why we're sluggish is because we don't believe in our country anymore. We don't believe in our politicians, in our banks, there's no justice, and so there's no rule of law. The powers that be aren't ruling for the people. The people are losing out every day. They're being impoverished more and more every day. So it's hard to be Nigerian again, because it's hard to believe in your country, in your national identity, when there's nothing to write home about, nothing to be proud of. And so people don't work well. But when people love the country, they put in a good day's work. You go to work in the morning to build your country
Mm.
for the well-being of your nation. You have
Yeah.
national pride. They talk about gay pride. Forget that. We need national pride.
Mm.
Gay pride has taken away national pride and given us globalism and impoverished and destroyed our countries. We need to reverse that. Stop the gay pride and start building national pride and rebuild our countries, not just economically, but morally. Gay pride destroys the values of our families, family ethics, family values, and that destroys our country. Our country is built on family values, the strength of marriages, a man and a woman having children and nurturing those children for the future of their nation. These are the things that globalism are destroying, the United Nations are destroying. And so we've got to forget the values of globalism, the United Nations, and rebuild true values. This is why I like organizations like Boys Brigade and things like that, because they rebuild faith values, they rebuild family values, um, national values. You always see the Boys Brigade saluting, loving their nation. And that's what we got to have, loving our
Mm.
nation, loving Nigeria,
Mm. Yes, sir.
being proud of being Nigerian, building this country and being educated, knowing what, because if when the people become aware of what builds our economy, then the government will do it because they know that people have awareness. And
Wow.
the
Thank
government
you.
is nonsense anymore.
Mm. I my my patriotism meter just went a level up.
Amen. What we talk
Wow.
about, three F's, sorry, sir, three F's. Three F, faith, family, flag.
Yeah, I hear you, sir. I hear you,
The
sir.
three F's, faith,
I hear you.
family, flag.
And the flag. Yeah. You know. So we must rediscover our pride in our nation again. We must begin to believe that it can work, that we can make it work. We are that generation. We are that generation, and we will make it work. Prof, just some geopolitical, discussion before I let you go today. One last question. A lot is happening in the world today. All of these conflicts, regional conflicts we have around the world. In the Middle East, in the Far East, we see what's happening with Ukraine, Russia, and all of this happening around the world. And we see that the American president is, taking the center stage for moderating peace around the world today. And today is the 13th of August 2025, and on Wednesday, on Friday the 15th, there is said to be a peace talk between the president of the United States, Donald Trump, and the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. I was going to ask any prospects in these peace discussions, the outcome of these discussions, does it hold any prospects for growth and development and the, reestablishment of sovereignty, national sovereignty on the African continent?
Well, you get me going with this question. I could spend an hour on this one. There's, we are living in wonderful days. I've been waiting for decades for things like this to happen, not really understanding what but for something good to happen to our nations. And it's unfolding now. The press hates Trump because he's taking away the control of the globalist, and much of the media is still controlled by the globalist. And so they always miss what Trump's doing. And all they do is criticize what he has for breakfast, and they demonize him. Maybe he's eating cat or dog this morning. I don't know. They just make up rubbish. And that's all they can say is that they don't like his hair or, whatever. But they never report on something good that's happening. Um, and they've deceived many people about what's going on. Now, this what's going on Friday with these peace talks with Putin, between Trump and Putin. They didn't invite European leaders. They didn't invite any globalists. Russia has rebelled against globalism, and so has China. The three most hated men in the world today are Xi of China, Putin of Russia, and Trump of America. Why? Because all three of them have rebelled against globalism.
Mm.
So they are the most evil people on earth today, according to the globalists and the banks and the media. And so you got BRICS, the BRICS nations, BRICS, that's Brazil, Russia, India, China, and
South
South
Africa.
Africa. Many other nations are wanting to join that. BRICS is a good thing. It's not a threat to Trump at all and to America. Trump doesn't want to destroy BRICS, but he wants to work with it. Now, Trump has to do certain, appear in a certain way publicly, because he's got to try to keep the world unified. You got people that hate this group, people that hate that group, and he's got to try and keep them all together.
Mm.
So he doesn't always show his cards. But I know he has a love for what we call a multipolar future. Not, the banks were, had a hegemony, or a single polar world where they controlled everything. But Trump
Mm.
believes in a multipolar world where we partnership with other people. And this, I want to be brief on this, but it goes right back to the foundation of America, when the British Empire ruled that nation back in the 18th century. And the American wanted sovereignty. They wanted self-control and independence. And not only America, but the founding fathers wanted that for other nations. They didn't want globalism. Globalism of that day was the British Imperial Empire, and it still is.
Mm.
But it comes under different names and under different masks and disguises today, through the banks and so on. The City of London and these banking empires. And so the offshore accounts and all this
Yeah.
financial industry that's set up. And so the early American fathers wanted to destroy imperialism, colonialism, and have the situation where countries were sovereign and self-governing and industrialized. Not just sovereign, but they were industrialized. So England didn't want countries to be industrialized, because they would become independent and powerful and sovereign. And so England kept the industry to itself, and was forcing America to follow an agricultural future, just like they're doing to Nigeria today. Well, they didn't even want us to have agriculture here. They just want us to have austerity, have nothing. But it's still the same policies. And so America rebelled against that and said, no, we're going to manage our own future. And so then if you fast forward to President Lincoln, by his time, the British banks had regained some control over America after they lost the War of
Yeah.
Independence. They didn't give up. They never give up. You work through subterfuge and covert operations, and worm their way back into power structures and politics and banking and business, and regain controls, even though they don't set up the UK flag in America. They still fundamentally control things. And so in the Civil War, Lincoln wanted to liberate the slaves, and he was following Russia, because the Tsar of Russia then liberated the serfs. That's SERFS, serfs, SERFS. That was the slave class of Russian people,
Mm.
the laborers, the rural laborers, and so on. So all through Europe, you had serfs that were domestic slaves, basically. And Russia was the first to liberate them and to bring them on the basis of social equality with everybody else. And he was a friend, the Tsar of Russia was a friend of Lincoln. And Lincoln wanted to follow that and follow this new politics, this new kind of economy, by
Yeah.
liberating slaves in America as well. And but the biggest threat to the British Empire was Russia and America becoming friends, and forming a kind of alliance and economy that would industrialize them, and that would pretty well overthrow British globalism. And so that was the main threat. And so what they wanted to do, the British, is they supported the southern states of America in the Civil War against Lincoln. The southern states were the ones that owned the slaves and were the agricultural economy based on slavery. And Britain wanted that economy to continue. Lincoln wanted to industrialize Britain. And the southern states were getting rich on slaves and agriculture. So Britain supported the southern slaves to defeat Lincoln in that war and to maintain slavery and an agricultural society, not to
Yeah.
industrialize them. But Russia helped Lincoln. They brought their navy in and parked their ships off the coast of America on the east and west coast of America to stop the British Navy getting in with to bring weapons to the southern states to help them defeat Lincoln. So Russia was helping. Now, you don't know that in American history. The only thing they tell you on American media is how evil Russia is. And definitely they've committed evils. And there's always been evils, but there's also potential. There's you could say about all countries, there's a bad twin and there's a good twin.
Yeah.
In every country, and all of, especially today with globalism infecting every country, there's very bad players in all of our countries today. But there's also good people who have a better vision in all of our countries, and we've got to find these people and work with them. So Lincoln wanted to team up with Russia and build a railway across Alaska into eastern Russia. And and he loved railways because railways disenfranchised the British Navy. The British Navy controlled the world in trade.
Yeah.
And so Lincoln said, well, if they can build a railway between America and Russia through Alaska, there's only about 2.5 miles between Russia and Alaska, between the islands that join those countries together. It's very easy to build a railway across there. But Britain stopped that. They assassinated Lincoln, and one of the main reasons, because what terrifies Britain more than anything else is the development of good Russian-American relationships. They cannot allow that to happen. So now you fast forward, and I'll be quick on this, but to the Second World War, you've got the president of America called F.D. Roosevelt. And he had the same vision to end globalism, to end imperialism, to end the British Empire's control over the world after the Second World War, and build up relationships with all countries, Russia, China, all of these nations, and on an independent sovereign level as friends, industrializing the whole of Africa,
Yeah.
because all of Africa coming out of colonialism and entered into sovereign industrialization, development of wealth and resources, their own banks and their own finances, coming out of this globalist banking financial control. Roosevelt had this vision to end the British Empire, and he choked on an oyster. Um, Lincoln was shot, but they don't just have bullets; they also have oysters, and so then they put in another president that apologized for all the sins of Roosevelt, uh, and said no, we'll go with the British Empire, and that's basically what happened. The CIA was started at that point to defend the interests of the British Empire around the world. The American military was employed for the same reason, to go to war against any country that went out of this global financial system. They set up the IMF, the World Bank, Bank of International Settlements, to defend this imperial financial system around the world. And they called it the Banks of Development, but that's not what they were for. They might have done some development in some place, but ultimately they were there to
Yeah.
maintain imperial financial system. Um, and what they had to do was to put Russia at enmity, the Soviet Union. Now, the Soviet Union wasn't good. They did some good things and some bad things, But Roosevelt said, no, they can develop a better environment for global peace. They can work together, even though there are sins of these countries. There are also good things, instead, global imperialism said no. They're evil. You can't work with them. They put up the Iron Curtain that took us into the Cold War for decades. You shall have no relationships with the Soviet Union, basically so they could maintain their global dominance.
Mm.
Stop this, relationship that Lincoln wanted, Roosevelt wanted. And now when Kennedy came back in, he could see what they were doing, the evil of the CIA and the American military. He spoke about this. And he had to stop it before they brought them to nuclear war. And he reached out to the Soviet Union undercover without using his diplomats. He did it personally himself and built up proper relationships with the Soviet Union and was developing a world of peace and economic integration and in terms of sovereign cooperation. He wanted the same vision of Lincoln and Roosevelt to industrialize these nations. And Kennedy was also assassinated. He didn't choke on a prawn. He was shot as well as Lincoln was. And he was put out of business because he rebelled against the military and the CIA and the banks. They cannot have America and Russia working together. So coming forward to Trump now, when Trump was elected in 2016, they said, oh, it was Russiagate. Putin helped him to be elected to make the American people hate Russia even more. And the whole thing was a lie based on a fraudulent dossier by the British intelligence, the MI6, the Steele dossier. And many people are going to go to prison soon because of that lie. And because they don't want Russia, despite its evils and sins and whatever, I'm not whitewashing them or whatever you say, but every nation has them, every one of us. And so, but they don't want Russia and America developing the world economy through BRICS and through a revived American economy. They want austerity. And Putin and China and Trump don't want austerity. They want abundance and wealth to every nation so we can trade. And we can get wealth not on dominance of the world and war. You can either make money through war and printing money for war, or you can make money through massive development projects.
Mm.
And these people want money through development, not through war. And so Trump is having this peace talk with Putin in Alaska, of all places. Now, it's funny how the press misses this. They have completely missed this, like they miss everything Trump is doing. This is a clear signal because Trump has said this many times. He's following Lincoln. He's following Roosevelt. He's following Kennedy. And he wants a railway built between Alaska and Russia to develop the resources of the world and the economy of the world like we've never seen before. He is following the original American vision of sovereignty, industrialization, development for nations, pulling down imperialism and the control of a few and developing the wealth of many, increasing our wages, our home ownership, multipolarism, all countries cooperating together. Um, you know, Africa is going to develop greatly out of this because he's destroying globalism here, the imperialism that Roosevelt wanted to destroy, Lincoln wanted to destroy, Kennedy wanted to destroy. Trump is moving forward to finish this task. And it's great for all of our nations because we'll no longer have puppet governments,
Yeah.
globalist governments over us, standing in the way of industrialization. We'll all be included in this and we'll all be industrializing and we'll all be gaining sovereign control back over our resources for ourselves, pricing, our currencies, our trade. This is massive. This is huge. Having this peace talk with Putin in Alaska on Friday is a massive signal to the global economy, and they know it. They know what this is about in terms of developing a multipolar industrial world. for so that the billions of people that have been marginalized in poverty will no longer be marginalized in poverty anymore. And so it's starting, and
Mm,
it's a great thing to see. And we're living in a great day. We need to see this as people. We need to get on. We need to understand this. We need to learn about this. We need to get on board with this. We need to know the times that we're living in and become part of it as Christians.
mm,
Because it's not just industry, it's about family values, it's destroying
yeah,
globalism and family values, marriage, society, freedoms, man made in the image of God, not being ruled over by globalist dictators. There's so many Christian values that come into this. And if Christians aren't involved, other people will get involved to our hurt.
mm,
So
mm,
Christians must become involved. And as I said, we're building this on the teachings of Jesus of loving our neighbor and not allowing hundreds of billions of people to die in poverty
yeah,
and exclusion.
mm,
Everyone needs to be included in development and prosperity, in
I
home
hear you.
ownership, energy, resource, cheap energy. It's for everybody. It's for everybody. We're all neighbors, and we have to work
Yeah,
together
yeah.
and not allow one global empire to control us all.
Oh, thank you very much, sir. So, in the words of Prof, hear this, know your place, and play your part. We all have a part to play. You know, we say in the Lord's Prayer, Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We are the ones that enforce that will of heaven on earth as God has ordained for it to be. And we do so by playing our parts, you know, advancing family values, pushing for honor and humanity, you know, pressuring the government to enact policies that wear a human face and that ensure the collective prosperity of all her citizenry. Take the things you've heard today, implement them in your work with God and with your fellow man this week, and collectively, let's make our world a better place. Prof, thanks for taking the time to talk to us today. It's always a blessing to have this time with
Thanks.
you. Have yourself a great day. And for every one
Well
of you
done,
who's been a
Chris.
part of a
Same to
live,
you.
stream today, thank you for
Thank you.
joining. See you again on next stream. God bless you. Have yourself a great day. Thanks,
Well done,
Prof.
sir.
Yeah.
Thank you. Bye bye.